All right, hello everybody. Today I've got something a little different from usual for you. I am going to be talking about the first book in this omnibus. Uh, my friend Justin Fraser, author of The Good Guy and The Rackin', among other things, came to visit, and he dropped me off a bunch of random Aliens books. So I picked up this complete Aliens Omnibus Volume 1, and the first book in it is called Earth Hive. And, I read it and I thought it might be worth talking about a little bit. I do science fiction, usually try to do stuff a little bit more, I don't know, classic, but, I thought this might be worth taking a look. And it's actually a pretty decent book. This book is written by a guy named Steve Perry. It is called Earth Hive, as opposed to Hive Earth, which is what I kept thinking the title was. The title obviously kind of tells you what the book is going to be about, right? Like, oh, there's going to be it's an aliens book, and it's called Earth Hive. So there's going to be a hive of aliens on Earth. Fair enough. But in reality, that actually is only a very small portion of the story, and I would say that the novel actually suffers a little bit for that. Because what we actually get is a much more like conventional aliens kind of story, right? Where we have a expedition that's believed to be some kind of an alien home planet, maybe, or something. We have the government and we have corporations dealing with stuff. It's interesting in this book, and I'm not sure why. So I looked it up, and this book was published like a few months after the release of Alien 3, the movie. So this is an old book, 92 or 93. And so it's not clear, but like all the recent alien stuff keeps like Weyland-Yutani, Weyland-Yutani, Weyland-Yutani over and over and over again. And this book, I don't even think Weyland-Yutani actually gets mentioned directly. I mean, it might show up somewhere once or twice, but it is not like the big mover and shaker in this book, which is, to its credit, right? It implies that there's more going on in the world than one super corporation being evil for no apparent reason and with no apparent one in its way to stop it. There's the government, and then there's this corporation called Bionational, and both of them want alien specimens. And there's actually a lot going on, despite the fairly simple results that we end up with. The prose in the story is, I'd say, a little bit above functional. A lot of the time, it's just kind of like, here's the thing that's happening and stuff. But sometimes Steve Perry really gets into some like detailed descriptions of things, and he uses some, just some like phrasing and words that are actually pretty interesting. I mean, the prose can be a little clinical at times, but it does have some descriptions that can kind of make your stomach crawl. Like, for instance, when we get descriptions of like alien eggs opening, and I'll quote a little bit from there. He leaned down over the egg. The flaps glistened with strands of shining slime. Finger bone-like legs emerged and caught the edges of the opened egg, hauling the primary embryo stage of the alien's crab-like body onto the lip. It leapt at him. Yada, yada, yada. So, you can see that there's some fairly good phrasing there. There's some fairly good visceral words being popped in. And at the same time, there's kind of this air of clinicalness that also kind of, weakens it a little bit as well. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but it has its good points. Despite the fact that it's fairly well written, there are some bits of silliness. For instance, there are only a limited number of ways that a person can think of to describe the shape of an alien's head, and I think Steve Perry goes through all of them in this book. The word banana appears more than once, and yeah. I also get the impression that the author doesn't have a particularly good understanding of guns, which is a little bit weird because when I looked up Steve Perry, it turns out he grew up in the Deep South. So I imagine that he knows guns pretty well, but like he uses the terminology from the movie Aliens without seeming to understand it, right? He talks about 10 millimeter ammunition all over the place because they said it in the movie. And that's all well and good, but if you actually know guns, you know that there's multiple types of ammunition that can be called 10 millimeter. 10 millimeter is just a caliber, right? So we have 40 Smith and Wesson is a 10 millimeter round. 10 millimeter is a pistol round, but there's also probably like rifle style 10 millimeter rounds and stuff like that too. So you need more than that. He also uses the word caseless, as if it makes the bullet more powerful, which generally speaking, as far as I understand how caseless ammunition works, is not really the case. No pun intended. Caseless ammunition is used to, reduce, I guess, wasted, mass. If the propellant and the bullet are put together in a way that doesn't have a heavy metal case that's holding them in place, then number one, you're now only limited by the mechanical limitations of the chamber itself, and number two, you're not carrying around a bunch of brass or steel or whatever for the cases. And so it has some advantages, but it also has disadvantages like difficulty in properly handling caseless ammo, right? So there's all kinds of deals with that. The fact that a round is caseless does not make it particularly good at shooting things or penetrating armor or whatever. In fact, there's also a point in the book where he talks about like interchanging ammo from like a rifle into a pistol, and it's like, oh, it'll work, but you'll get like 5 or 6 shots out before the gun explodes on you. And it's like, that's not how that usually works either, even for a caseless round, right? Because the amount of propellant that you would use is proportional to the strength of the chamber that you would be putting the ammunition into, right? And so a rifle chamber might be rated for let's say 100,000 psi, whereas a pistol chamber is only rated to 30,000 psi, right? And so like the amount of propellant you'd have is different. And so the bullet, even if it was caseless, wouldn't fit in the chamber of the smaller gun, let alone let you fire it, let alone survive 5 or 6 shots before it explodes. It'd be pretty catastrophic. So there's that, which kind of poked at me as I was reading the story about like every once in a while there'd be some gun thing. It's like, ugh, whatever. And having looked up Steve Perry and finding out that he grew up in the Deep South, I imagine that he grew up with probably some guns, and it doesn't make any sense that he was so clumsy about it in this particular book. And I've actually started reading part of the second story, and he seems to be better about it in the second story. So I don't know, but anyway, little gun nut digression to the side. This story is kind of like an Aliens or an Alien story. You have a bunch of characters who are ripped from a variety of backgrounds, and I would say that the characterization is fairly good and consistent, so, nothing bad there. Of course, this being an Alien story, it's not really a story about characters changing and growing and yada, yada, yada. Most of them are fairly static, but they get the job done, usually. In this story, we have several different factions with different plans for the aliens. We have the military, we have the government, we have corporations, we have colonists, and we even have some cultists, which I'll get to in the spoiler section. Another thing in this story is that there is some salacious material that is, I'm going to say, largely unnecessary. It doesn't seem to add much to my understanding of the characters or the story, and it probably could have been done in a more tasteful way, but it's there, and I figured I should warn you about it if you decide to go check this book out. I will say, however, that for a science fiction, what would you call it, a licensed novel, it actually has some pretty cool ideas in it. For instance, we have the idea that aliens can become queens if none are available. This is, of course, broken by the counterexample from Alien 3, kinda, sorta, right? And also by the in Alien there was some cut there was some cut footage that suggested that the alien converted people into the eggs somehow magically. But when Aliens the movie came out, James Cameron decided to go with a more standard kind of ant or bee insect kind of life cycle, plus the scary eggs and stuff. We have a very cool idea about how the android soldiers that appear in this book need to actually be more human in order to be effective at their jobs. That giving them more human, more human brains, more human bodies, makes them more effective as soldiers, which I think is an interesting kind of switcheroo. We have a very cool point about, and this is something that I had never really actually noticed, that technically the laws for androids that are described in Aliens are a modification of Asimov's law of robotics, right? It's not that a robot may not harm a human, but that a robot may not kill a human. And there's a very good point made in the story that you couldn't have a robot surgeon, for instance, if a robot was unable to harm a human, because the idea of surgery is that you do short-term harm for long-term gain, and I think that's a really cool idea. There's also, and it's not a spoiler because the story is called freaking Earth Hive, but the idea of an alien showing up on Earth and how easy it would be for it to spread because Earth is so full of life is another cool idea that's explored in this book. On the downside, the FTL travel stuff is kind of hazy. They have FTL travel, but not FTL comms, question mark. There's some parts where that seems like it might be inconsistent because at one point they fly a long way and then they get a message, and the message couldn't have caught up with them if there wasn't FTL comms. It's a little funky, and it's not a huge part of the story, but it did bug me a little bit. And then there's some like buzzword ideas that are kind of left relatively undeveloped. Like they talk about something that they call spider silk armor, which you can kind of guess what that is, right? But at the same time, it's never really developed in any interesting or meaningful or even technical way where they're like, oh yeah, it has a tensile strength of 4,000 times, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, that's about all I can say about this book without getting into spoilers. So let's move on to the spoiler section. And if you don't want to have the book spoiled at all, head to the conclusion and you can see a little bit more, kind of closing thoughts. Here we go. All right, spoiler time. So we'll start with I'll kind of step through the plot a little bit and talk about some of the things that I found interesting or uninteresting. So the first part of this book starts with some unrelated characters to the rest of the story because they die, exploring a small derelict ship that is in Earth orbit, and of course they have contact with something that presumably is an alien, but of course you don't see it, right? So that suggests strongly that already one alien or more has been brought to Earth, ? And the question is that true, or, was this the attempt to do that and they fail, or what kind of thing? Another thing about this book is that the aliens are really, really powerful in this book. They're described as bullets just kind of bounce off of them because they're so heavily armored, which, doesn't really track with Aliens, the movie, honestly. Like, when they actually had their guns, they could shoot the aliens and the aliens would die. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that they were smarter than they thought, and that they did things that they didn't expect, and that they were, basically very limited in what materials they had to bring up against the aliens. So, Steve Perry makes the aliens a lot more resilient in this particular book, and it makes them a little bit more ridiculous, I would say, because if you have a 10 millimeter slug of copper and lead traveling at 3,000 feet per second, it doesn't matter what your skin is made of. It's probably going to go through, it'll go through, that'll go through, a half an inch of steel or something like that. There's no organic process, ostensibly, that would create something that hard and that thick. And there's no reason for the aliens to be that hard or that thick because they didn't grow up. They didn't evolve in an area where there were people shooting at them. They, evolved hypothetically in an area where they were up against other, creatures, not 3,000 foot per second, 10 millimeter slugs of lead and copper. So we see these people, they check out this derelict ship, and then, cut to black, basically. And then we get introduced to kind of our main actual characters. We have a Marine, or we have a Marine who's kind of in the brig permanently, named Wilkes, and then we have a colonist, or former colonist, named Billy. And they were the only two survivors of an alien infestation on a planet that's called Rim throughout this book. Wilkes was scarred both mentally and physically, and he was, kind of said to be crazy, and so they gave him a court-martial and they threw him in jail. Billy kind of lost her mind almost completely. She was institutionalized, she's in a mental hospital, doped up to hell, and it's kind of a cliche, but she has dreams of things that, she doesn't think are real, but it's all true, but then even she can't believe it. It's so horrible, right? The government of Earth is planning to grab an alien sample. They somehow got information about the or a homeworld of the aliens, and so they're sending a ship with Marines on it to ostensibly go there and pick up samples. And then a corporation called Bionational sends a ship in pursuit. And that's kind of the main plot of this story. Wilkes is going on. Basically, it's kind of like how Ripley gets pulled into the expedition in Aliens, where they're going to go get aliens, the government, and he's there in jail in the brig, and they haul him out to make him come along as a consultant, basically. Kind of a similar character thing for Wilkes there. But before Wilkes gets onto the ship, he actually breaks Billy out of the institution, which is handled a little bit too easily, and they kind of get away with it a little bit too easily, and smuggles her onto the ship with the Marines for, I guess the ostensible reason is that, we're going to finish what we started kind of thing, question mark? I don't know. Now, they get on the ship. Bionational has another ship that's chasing them. And then we get a little bit of the side story bit in the middle where people on Earth with like empathic powers, and this is another one of the cool ideas that I didn't want to spoil to the non-spoiler people, but like they have this idea of like tele-empathy, where like there's these people who either have a particular brain mutation or they have some hardware that allows them to like see empathic responses of people kind of in the general area of them. And so there's a bunch of people on Earth who are like waking up screaming and like, I'm having a dream about this monster, and they describe it as like a banana and yada yada yada. and they're getting these signals which suggests that there are infections on Earth already. In fact, I have a chunk there that I thought I would read because it's kind of cool. Case number 232558, TM Duncan. So I was standing next to the flight attendant, hitting on her a little, and then I noticed she looked familiar, like somebody I knew. Dr. Frankel. Familiar. Did you recognize her? Duncan. Yeah, it took a second. She looked like my mother. So I figure, well, I shouldn't be trying to come on to my mother. Then all of a sudden her chest tore open and this thing looked like a snake or a big eel with a lot of teeth comes out, spewing blood and all, and flew out of her right at my face. That's when I woke up, and man, I was never so glad in my life to be awake. I stayed up for 2 days. Maybe we get some like little case studies from this, which are kind of fun. In fact, there is actually a really cool literary reference in this part of the book, which is a reference to the story by Ambrose Bierce called An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. That segment is actually pretty well handled and got me. And it was like, eventually I was like, oh, I see what's happened here. But it's well handled, and it's a good literary reference, and it's something to spice up the story in this middle part where it's kind of we're kind of away from our main characters and we're like observing things from bird's eye view. And this leads me to the question, like, you're gonna name the story Earth Hive, and then you're gonna make the Earth infection kind of the side story? Like, that's just a really weird decision for me. And I guess the idea was to make it so that we have characters that we care about and to carry them on through later books. But I mean, like, spend some time on that alien infection of Earth, and rather than like we get a bit, a couple of short chapters and maybe 10 or 15 pages. It's not a lot. But the long story short is that there's this weird pro-alien cult on Earth, and it's not clear how they ever got started. In fact, it's even less clear when they accomplish some of their goals how they ever got started. Because basically there's this guy who's like, I have the message of the incarnate God, and I'm telling you, this random hacker guy, to spread this message over the Earth, and we're trying to avoid being captured. But like it's not clear where this cult leader got this idea, and so it's a little maybe it's something they'll explain in a later book, but I don't know. But this cult breaks in to the Bionational office, and they infect themselves deliberately and then carry the infected people out. There's this weird moment where the cult leader is somehow like surprised by his fate, which frankly doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But I thought I'd read it. It leapt at Salvalle, wrapped a muscular tail around his neck, jammed its ovipositor into his startled mouth, and clutched his face with the legs, pressing itself flat against his face. Arona could see the terror grip the man, and he realized that in this final moment of truth, the reality was more than he had bargained for Salvalle tried to scream. So, not only is there an alien cult that is trying to spread the aliens around Earth, but they also seem to be completely unclear about what the aliens actually do to people. And so I don't know. I don't know how that works, but there it is. It ends up being kind of hard to believe for me. Maybe it'll be explained in a later book, but in this particular story, I was just like, this is weird, So after we see all this, stuff that basically is saying, oh, Earth is infected, we head back to deep space. The corporate ship catches up to the government ship. They board them, and they have a bunch of android soldiers, plus this one guy who gets a couple of pages of description, but it's fairly effective description. He's basically a pure psychopath, and so he'll kill anybody, do whatever, and he's very good at that. So, he's a psychopath, but he's a fairly reasonably well-written psychopath. So I'll give the book something there. The Marines from the government ship get sent down to the planet's surface as bait for aliens, and then they have these corporate android soldiers guarding them with these flying machines, and the flying machines get attacked by flying monsters on this planet, and so it's like the aliens aren't even the head honchos on this home planet. They're they hide in their hives because they're scared of these aerial things. But the corporate androids don't know about it, and they get mutilated. They mention that the android soldiers have no Asimov law restrictions, and there's actually a little discussion earlier about the Asimov thing and the difference between may not harm versus may not kill. Now, the thing is that because Wilkes smuggled Billy onto the ship, she's kind of this unknown +1 that the bionational people don't know about. And so she's able to turn things around, kind of a grown-up Newt moment kind of thing going on. And actually, the psychopath guy, despite being really, really good at planning things out and acting quickly and all that stuff, in his description, he actually gets taken down pretty easily, which is a little bit of an anticlimax, honestly. Then, once Wilkes and Billy have control of the ship again, they basically have this big cool fight as they try to pick the Marines back up. It's a fun sci-fi action fight. You can kind of see it in kind of the form of the movie that Aliens was. And then the plan is to head back to Earth. And of course, meanwhile, so the way to describe it is that they're going like 90,000 light years or something, and it takes them 9 months each way or something like that. So like they're gone for a year and a half. By the time they get back to Earth, aliens have totally taken over, and they come back. Their ship is then stolen by some of the Earth government people that are some of the last few humans that are still kind of holding out against the aliens. And then Wilkes and Billy escape onto an unmanned ship leaving Earth with supplies, and that is the end of the book. So, additional cool ideas for the spoiler section. I mentioned this already, but like the telepathy thing is kind of cool. One I haven't mentioned is the destruction, or another one I mentioned is the idea of even more hyper-predatory life on the alien homeworld, these flying monsters and stuff. And then the thing that I didn't mention, but I think is still kind of a spoiler, is that this is the destruction of the alien homeworld. They drop a bunch of nukes on it, and the idea is that there's going to be so many nukes that they're going to launch a bunch of volcanic explosions and completely wipe the planet. And they say that this is the alien homeworld, but is it ... question mark. So, anyway, that is I think the stuff I want to spoil, leaving some things untouched so that you'll still have some surprises if you read the book. But let's move on to the conclusion. So, in conclusion, this was a fun, easy, short read. I like the Aliens movies, the good ones. I like all 2 of the Aliens movies that exist, right? So liking those movies, this book was kind of a good callback without being too member-berry ridden. Like some authors, when they do something that's related to something that came earlier, they fill it with references. And like this has a few references, and I would even say that the references don't make sense in the light of the movie Alien 3. Because like it's like, oh, there was this rumor that this one person was at that they, these 3 people got away from the, what I mean? But like if you've seen Alien 3, that's not the way that a rumor would have gotten around about, Ripley, Hicks, and Newt. So To be fair, this book came out a couple of months after Alien 3 came out in theaters, so it was probably being written before Alien 3 came out, and there might not have been a lot of crosstalk there, so who knows. But anyway, it's a fun, easy, short read. It has a very clever literary reference that got me, and it was like, oh, cool, I know what this is referencing, and yet it still got me, right? There are pluses and minuses to describing the aliens. You end up with, using the word banana to describe the alien's head way too often. And to be fair, Perry does try to switch it up, but there's only so many ways you can describe an alien's head shape in prose. And there's only a certain number of things that you can relate it to, right? So it is how it is. As I mentioned in the spoiler section, there are a few questionable plot elements which might be described in future books, but not much hint of that so far here. It's worth noting that Steve Perry writes a lot of novelizations of movies and stuff, but he also wrote 4 official Conan novels, post what's his name? I don't always forget his name. Robert E. Howard. Post Robert E. Howard Conan books. He wrote 4 of those, which are official, but in the reviews, they're supposedly a little bit over silly. So, a little overstated and silly. This book is not overstated and silly so much as it is, kind of reminiscent of the movie. He also wrote Nightmare Asylum, which is the next book in this omnibus. And then he co-wrote The Female War with someone whose name is coincidentally, Stefani Perry? But, she's apparently a totally different author who writes other movie world fiction books and has written books in the Xena Warrior Princess series, Aliens, Resident Evil, and Star Trek novelizations. So, I haven't read any of her books, so I don't know, but that's what's in this omnibus. I like Aliens. I liked Alien. I like Aliens. But I probably would never have thought to pick these books up if a friend hadn't given me the book as hey, I finished with this and you can have it kind of thing. So, I don't know. I thought it was worth talking about. You kind of end up walking the line between independent fiction and fan fiction when you get into these novelizations, which can have its ups and downs, and a lot of downs, honestly. But this one did a pretty good job, I would say. I was surprised by, how little there was of let's refer to this kind of stuff in the story. So not bad. But I don't know. This is not the kind of thing that I review on this channel very often. But I could do more if people want. I don't know. What do you guys think? Anyway, that's what I've got for today. I started reading Nightmare Asylum, and his gun words are better, but then there's also this flush of technobabble, which is very different from this. This book does not have a ton of technobabble. The next one does, at least so far. I've read 2 or 3 chapters. But anyway, that's what I got for today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed. Have a good one, and I will see you next time. I guess it's December 23rd, so Merry Christmas, and stuff like that. Have a good one.